This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook and Super Inframan. Thank you so very much. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight we're kind of wandering the road. We're going to talk about some news articles and stuff and see where things go. And I have with me, once again, Mr. Christopher Ernst.
Hello, everybody.
And back for the first time since his initial appearance on the show, David J. West.
How you doing?
And David, you were an author, and you came on, what was it, like a year ago now?
I think it was actually this spring, so it just feels like a year.
Okay, yeah, that definitely feels like a year ago. I also have no sense of time, so, anything past like last week was a long time ago. So, we're going to talk, and Chris, you found some really good news articles, I thought. And I have a bunch of them saved because we haven't done a news show in a while. But, we'll also just follow these trains wherever they go. We're not going to stick just to the news articles if we don't need to anyway. I think that made sense.
That made sense.
But do you? Why don't we start with the one the last one you sent me with the electromagnetism, and I thought that was really fascinating.
Right. So this was an article from Popular Mechanics from October 27th, the title of which is Controversial New Theory Says Human Consciousness is Electromagnetic? Question mark, of course, because, it's pop science. But it is an interesting, it actually does come from an interesting study. And the article's pretty short. I'll read it. Could the thorny question of human consciousness be answered by simple electromagnetic waves? One improbably dualist scientist believes so, and he suggests the human mind is a combination of physical matter and electromagnetic field. This is a big question, and the proposed answer here is controversial. The University of Surrey's John Joe McFadden, quote, posits that consciousness is in fact the brain's energy field. The university says in a statement, making McFadden's dualism a question of matter and energy, the institution says, not the classic body and mind distinction. Throughout history, philosophers around the world have tried to account for the special seeming nature of human beings within the world, or even, some fear, the entire universe. From where does our robust self-awareness and sentience arise? People who believe everything is physically present and caused are called materialists, meaning there's nothing extra that can't be measured. What you see and touch is what humans are. Dualists instead believe there's something extra. The mind, dualists say, is separate in some ways. That could mean a separate, immeasurable living soul that lives after death, or it could be as simple as the hotly contested idea of qualia, the hint at a extra color humans can't see, for example, as that relates back to consciousness. I hope I pronounced that right. The idea of a scientific lampshade on mind-body dualism certainly isn't new, but McFadden's research published in the journal Neuroscience of Consciousness is the latest to try to marry the fields. Here is a quote from him. I argue here that nearly all examples of so-called integrated information, including neuronal information processing and conventional computing, are only temporarily integrated in the sense that outputs are correlated with multiple inputs. The information integration is implemented in time rather than space, and thereby cannot correspond to physically integrated information. I point out that only energy fields are capable of integrating information in space. And to conclude, basically, McFadden is saying he doesn't believe the physical structures inside the brain account for how information extends through our, quote, minds and form integrated ideas. That, he says, must be happening within the added medium of the brain's electromagnetic field. And all of this, McFadden claims, is supported by experiments on the nature of brain activity. This sounds wild. It genuinely is wild, but McFadden is a molecular geneticist and is following a centuries-old tradition of introducing the absolute latest knowledge into a new theory of what makes us human. This means as long as the human brain is alive, McFadden says, it generates an electrical glow in which the nitty-gritty human stuff is happening. And the best part is that his theory is testable in the laboratory. Quote, there are, of course, many unanswered questions, such as degree and extent of synchrony required to encode conscious thought, the influence of drugs or anesthetics on the semi-field, or whether semi-fields are casually active in animal brains, he explains in the paper. Yet the semi-theory, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, CEMI, provides a new paradigm in which consciousness is rooted in an entirely physical, measurable, and artificially malleable physical structure and is amenable to experimental testing. So, it's a lot, big mouthfuls. I know you had some thoughts on that, Seriah.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic bit of research. But again, I feel like they're narrowing it down to materialism despite the energy field involved. You know, like instead of... Because one of the things we know is that we're not restricted, like all knowledge is not restricted to our brain. Like
Right.
There's something holographic going on with our bodies. You know, they've talked even in mainstream science articles about how our gut acts like a second brain. You've seen people who get organs from people who then start picking up the preferences of the people who donated the organs without knowing who the organs came from. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that says, yes, there's energy is a big part of this. But in this article, it still tries to numb it down to, well, the energy is just a side effect, and that's what creates consciousness, rather than saying maybe the energy is the consciousness that's animating the body.
Mm-hmm.
Nor does it address, of course, near-death experiences when the brain is no longer functioning, yet the person can, see what's going on in the room, etc. So I feel like it's a really interesting way of studying it, and it probably has some truth to it, but I still think they're trying to fit it into that materialist paradigm with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see, I agree with you, definitely. And I also don't think that means that it couldn't be, that this couldn't be, true, like that there couldn't be something happening here that we haven't discovered yet about the mechanism of, awareness and perception and that side of consciousness. But the idea that somehow, the me, that is the consciousness is, a epiphenomena of, this field. Yeah, that's a leap that, I guess it makes sense in a materialist paradigm, but
right.
It doesn't. And it can be both. I mean, I think that there could be this field, and this field could be interacting in some way that maybe we can find, something very interesting about. Because I do think that there is, as you've talked about, and I think we've talked about before, in terms of the role of electricity and how that plays sort of in the structure of creation, and how much more there probably is in terms of connectivity between electromagnetic fields, the human body and the rest of the world. And I'm talking about, psi or, awareness, different sensory awareness, or even going into the electric universe theory, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I tend to think is it definitely ties into the electric universe, and it's still materialist, but it's baby steps in expanding the general thought process on how everything is animated and powered.
Yeah.
The what was I just going to say about it? Before the electric universe? Oh, the role electricity plays in the paranormal, but also the stuff that Kundalini does to you that makes is so electric. And even people who don't have active Kundalini who affect electrical devices and stuff like that. I mean, electricity is clearly at play in a part of what we are. It's just a matter of, is that a side effect of what we are, or is it part of what we really are? You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's clearly coming into play with a lot of stuff. I think it's one of those factors you see in everything.
Yeah, and I always go back to sort of the paradigm that I personally, look at the world through, which comes from sort of a Vedic standpoint, and in that space, again, this is interpretive and not literal. The prana, which is this sort of this primordial energy that is responsible, for giving life to everything. I'm saying that in a very reductive way. Right. That electricity is sort of the shadow of that, I guess would be a way to say. So there is this connection, and it's not like it is unconnected. There's just levels of it working that we don't have the capability to sense at this point. So I still think that it can very much be connected to consciousness. It's and like David said, baby steps. It's great. I think that if there could be something really interesting that comes out of this, if this proves to be replicable, reproducible.
Yeah, I mean, it may be 50 years from now, but still, right. it is that first step toward uniting something more into the materialist paradigm.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you wanted to say about it, David?
No. You guys covered my thoughts pretty good.
All right. So this one I found very interesting. This came from Futurism.com. Astronomers discovered deep structure under the moon's largest crater. A team of astronomers found a large excess of mass under the moon's largest crater, the Atkin Basin. Likely a relic from an ancient asteroid impact event, but perhaps something stranger. Imagine taking a pile of metal 5 times larger than the big island of Hawaii and burying it underground, said lead author Peter B. James from Baylor University in Waco, Texas, in a statement. That's roughly how much unexpected mass we detected. The strange mass extends to depths of more than 300 kilometers, or 186 miles, according to the researchers' paper, which was published in the journal Geophysical Research Letters earlier this year. To find the mass, the researchers looked at changes in the strength of gravity around the moon by analyzing data from NASA's Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory mission. Computer simulations suggest that the crater could have been created by an iron-nickel core asteroid that spread out into the upper mantle of the moon during impact, while the metal could remain suspended in the moon's mantle until the present day, rather than sinking to the moon's core. Another theory floating around as to what the mass might be the result of: lunar magma ocean solidification, or the process in which a once molten moon surface solidified over billions of years while forming dense oxides. And of course, we can also add in, maybe it's artificial.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's not something we expect to find on the moon, and it's not in a place we expect to find it. So once again, we've added to the moon mysteries rather than resolving anything.
I mean, I want it to be a giant spaceship that's, the millions of years old, that's embedded in the moon. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Wouldn't it be great if, like, the early, trip to the moon, moonshot rocket in the eye was somehow prescient? It was like embedded in the Akashic record, and that's that. No, wouldn't that be awesome? Remember that? Now I'm going to go into weird YouTube videos for a second, but do you guys remember that? I can't remember how many years ago, but there was this series of videos that were kind of obviously fake, but they were talking about that, was it the Apollo, was it maybe 17 mission? Like the secret mission where they went back to the moon and they found this female alien there, like in a spaceship. Do you guys remember? There's like a whole video on it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So it kind of reminds me of too.
Huh.
One of the things I remembered from when I was a kid watching, I want to say, Cosmos. I think there was a record of some monk or friar seeing fire on the moon, and they figured it was a big asteroid hitting it.
Yeah.
Probably only 500 years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting because maybe there could they talk about it still being molten if there was something that hit that. But I mean, that's deep. That's really deep, and that threatens my whole idea of how much I like the hollow moon idea from it ringing like a bell.
Right.
Well, but the thing is, that's the thing. It's only in one spot. So I mean, maybe it's a structure, not a spaceship, but like someone built something underground in the moon. Like our underground military bases, they built that on one part of the moon.
Well, that goes back to what was it a couple of weeks ago when Josh and I were on. Josh was reading from Ingo Swann's Penetration, where he's talking about the moon bases on the other side that he was remote viewing. It's another thing that it reminds, not the moon bases, but these naked extraterrestrials.
And they could see somebody.
Yeah, right? Yep, and they can see him as he's remote viewing. They can psychically see him. Yeah. Where was this again, Seriah? Did it say on the moon itself? Is it on the far side of the moon?
Well, it says where it is, but I don't know if it's on the far side of the moon. It's in the.
Well, if astronomers are seeing it, it's got to be on the side facing us, isn't it?
Right.
No, not necessarily. It's in the Atkin Basin, but they're using the NASA's Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory mission, the GRAIL, to find it. So I don't know. That might be circling the moon.
It's called the Grail.
That's the thing that actually did found the mass is the anagram for it is Grail.
I'm doing a little search here, and the South Pole Atkin Basin is an immense impact crater on the far side of the moon.
Okay, well there we go.
Ingo Swann was right.
Well, maybe. You never know. Maybe. I mean, I do love that idea. Like, I'm not sure it's right by any means, but I would love it to be right, that we get up there and we find out this is actually a construct. Right. No wonder we can't figure out where it came from.
Well, this on top of the water discovery, which, it is something.
Yeah, but it's kind of a given there was probably water on Mars. There was probably water on the moon. I mean, water seems to be more common than astronomers would like us to think for some reason.
That is definitely something I think that we are seeing, along with the amount of exoplanets that do indeed exist around there. Water is, more water than we thought.
Yeah, especially, the idea of hydrogen and oxygen combining somewhere should make it common.
And I know they said recently, too, that they're really starting to doubt that all the water on Earth came from comets as well. Because that, at one point, was one of the theories.
That's a lot of comets.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Do you want to do one, Chris?
Sure. Let's see. Anyone in particular?
No, I don't remember which
grab
one
you
had.
So there's one that I wanted to point out again, and this isn't necessarily new news, but from October 5th, there was a new piece that Nick Redfern had in Mysterious Universe that caught my eye, just because it was talking about about Roswell, and I don't know if people are familiar with. I think Nick's more recent theory about Roswell, which is that it was an experiment that was being done using interned Japanese Americans for tests, and that they were basically mutilated bodies that people found, and they were trying to cover up this government test. Well, this is a new one that Nick is talking about, that intersects a little bit with his Collins Elite book, and I don't know if people are familiar with that, the Final Events and the Secret Government Group on Demonic UFOs and the Afterlife, but I'll read this. It's a little short, kind of listicle. So this is from October 25th. A Mysterious Universe, and this is Nick Redfern. For decades, stories of alien abductions, UFO encounters, flying saucer sightings, and Area 51 have led millions of people to believe that extraterrestrials are secretly among us. But what if those same millions of people are all wrong? What if the UFO phenomenon has much darker and far more ominous origins than the realm of outer space? Since 2007, I've been carefully and quietly investigating the strange world of a secret group buried deep within the U.S. government named the Collins Elite. In 2010, my book, Final Events in the Secret Government Group on Demonic UFOs and the Afterlife, was published and told the story of my findings. It is the belief of that group that far from being extraterrestrial in origin, our purported alien visitors are in reality deceptive demons and fallen angels, the minions of Satan, who are paving the way for Armageddon, Judgment Day, and the reaping and enslavement of our very souls. It's important to note that I do not personally adhere to the beliefs of the Collins Elite, nor do I, as I have consistently noted in just about every interview I did for the book. I wrote the book for one reason, because I found it fascinating. There was a group in government that fully believes the UFO issue is demonic and quite literally hellish. I was prompted to investigate the story of the Collins Elite after speaking in 2007 with a man named Ray Boeche, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Boeche, who is a priest and also a former state director for the Mutual UFO Network in Lincoln, Nebraska. Back in 1991, Ray was contacted by a pair of physicists who were working on a classified Department of Defense program to contact what were described to Ray as non-human entities, or NHEs. Initially, the NHEs, contact with whom was done in a mind-to-mind fashion only, and in a way that paralleled the government's remote viewing programs of the 1970s and 80s, were believed to have extraterrestrial origins. That view changed radically when a deep and dark atmosphere enveloped the group. There were near endless runs of bad luck, people attached to the program died under mysterious circumstances, and the group ultimately came to believe that NHEs were not ETs after all, but deceptive and deadly demons seeking to manipulate and control us, the human race. The two physicists were deeply troubled by all this, hence the reason why they contacted Ray Boeche to determine if he was able to offer advice and guidance, given his background as both a priest and a ufologist. When Ray told me all this, and much more too, it prompted me to dig further into the work of this mysterious, shadowy think tank type organization, which I learned went by the nickname of the Collins Elite. Whether it has a more formal title, I still do not know. Beyond any shadow of a doubt at all, the strangest belief of the Collins Elite was that relative to the Roswell affair of July 1947. In what is certainly a unique fashion, they came to believe that nothing, extraterrestrial or otherwise, crashed at Roswell. Rather, the group concluded that the event was staged, a Trojan horse type event provoked by demons trying to deceive us into accepting the idea that vulnerable ETs had crashed at Roswell and who were responsible for the wave of flying saucers encounters that gripped the nation in the summer of 1947. For the Collins Elite, the alien debris and memory metals said to have been recovered at the crash site on the Foster Ranch, New Mexico, were nothing less than the result of diabolical demon alchemy. In other words, the group formed an opinion that these strange entities weaved the materials, then had it manifest on the Foster Ranch, thus creating the image of a crash of something exotic from the skies. But what of the bodies said to have been found at the site? Well, the Collins Elite has an answer to that too. The members claim to have read reports suggesting that no literal bodies were ever found at Roswell at all. Rather, they maintained that certain biological materials were recovered. Is it possible that some equally strange form of diabolical alchemy was at work to create not just the so-called memory metal that a number of players in the Roswell saga described seeing, but also to create a type of extraterrestrial jackalope, a creature that looks real and that exhibits prime evidence of DNA, flesh, bone, and skin, but that is in reality nothing more than a brilliant piece of hoaxing? This is most certainly what the Collins Elite came to accept as gospel. And so that's the little, article stub that he has from Mysterious Universe. The Collins Elite book itself, Final Events, I think it's a pretty good book. You have to feel that Nick is a worthwhile researcher, and I feel like that particular book at least rang true for me. And I think what interested me about this article was that I think more and more we're seeing the evidence of the influence of fundamentalist Christian groups within the within the government, within the sort of the deep state structure, within the structure itself, that are making a lot of these decisions, or have been influencing these decisions about like military, paranormal, UFO, supernatural information for a while now. And I think in Third Eye Spies, I believe that Pat Price is on record talking about that essentially that's why he was fired as a remote viewer, is that somebody who was fundamental, was a fundamentalist Christian, believed that what he was doing was demonic. And I still think that that's going on. And I oftentimes wonder about, how much influence that has in the current sort of parapolitical climate. You thinking about something like Dr. Future's most recent book, if people know Dr. Future from Conspiranormal, where he's talking about this sort of the influence of the corporate influence on the fundamentalist Christian movement in America, and sort of the corruption of that, which is a really interesting piece that he's done a few articles and interviews on. It's an interesting book that he just put out. And so for me, at least, when I saw this, it reminded me of something that I think we see more and more of evidence of as time goes by.
Yeah.
It's all demons.
Right.
And I know that there are people who feel like, especially when Bush was president in the early 2000s, that there was a fundamentalist group kind of pushing us toward Armageddon. Like, the idea was that they're not looking for peace; they're looking to bring about the final battle, and and so on and so forth. And that these people were tied in with the Bush regime to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's totally, I think, another part that plays into it, that, some people, I think, that I personally feel like is a really strong influence happening right now with all sorts of things, paranormal, but also political. And you can see some of it. I mean, you can see some of it in the way that, certain things are done, like even, what was it, when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem or something like that? I remember reading a few articles that were talking about how that was like part of this signaling amongst these sort of apocalyptic circles that we're getting toward end times, where they believe that they'll be saved, and so it's a good thing, I guess.
Good thing for them, not for any unbelievers.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
I also like Douglas Dietrich's take on the Roswell thing. If anyone's not familiar with Douglas Dietrich, I only had him on the show once. I broke into 2 shows back in 2015. He's a fairly controversial figure, to say the least.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But his claim basically is that he had to destroy a lot of documents from World War II and stuff when he worked for the military, and he has an eidetic memory, and he read everything before he destroyed it. His claim for Roswell was that it was actually a Japanese blimp that they were testing with Japanese prisoners, that they tried to escape or they sabotaged it or whatever, and that's what went down. And when you look at that, you go, well, that's reasonable, it's not impossible by any means.
Yeah, and to go into a little more detail on that, he would say that a lot of the guys that were operating it were the short little guys that had been in the what's the gangster name for the Japanese groups?
Oh, Yakuza.
Yakuza, and they cut off one of their fingers. So he was saying they've got the 3 fingers and a thumb, and he says because of the blimps, they're shaven for this, so there's no static electricity with their hair. And so he says when that blows up and they fall, and they're these little short guys that are 4'9", and they've got 4 fingers, and they just are burned horribly and they look weird. He tried to say that your average American soldier looking at that dead body is going, well, that's not human. That's alien. And I think there's something to that.
That definitely jibes with the theory that Redfern was putting forth, or at least it's another version of it. I think in his, if I remember correctly, it was the U.S. that was doing the tests. It's interesting.
And the thing about Dietrich's work is that the stuff you can verify tends to pan out. It's the stuff that he's adding in that he's saying that, they destroyed that you have no way to verify, or how he's connecting them, So it's like, it's interesting to me because things like that, there's a possible explanation for Roswell.
Yeah.
But, we still can't prove anything. It just gives us one more possibility.
I did look at for some reason, I don't know why, because I very seldom think of Roswell. I ended up looking at the original picture, the picture with Philip Corso, with the memo in hand and all the stuff in front of them. It's just thinking as I kind of came upon it, not really. I think I came upon it not intentionally, but it was in something I was looking at, and I was just looking at that and that's a kite. It's like a tinfoil kite.
Yeah.
Like what? I can't believe there was just this sort of moment of being completely separate from the entire mythology and history of Roswell. Not that I ever believed in it in the first place. That I saw this thing and I'm like, it's a freaking kite made out of tinfoil, guys. Really? Yeah.
Well, not only that, but John Keel suggested it was a Fugo balloon. And most people, when Keel suggested it, had never even heard of Fugo balloons, which were these balloons that the children in Japan during the war would make. And the idea was the children were trying to make them so that they would go completely across the Pacific Ocean and come down in America, and then the military would put bombs on them. And there's at least one that blew up in Idaho or something like that. And it didn't kill anyone. It took out a pond.
Yeah.
I thought one of them did kill a couple people.
Well, maybe it did. And there's some speculation it started some of the forest fires at the time too.
Right.
Yeah.
And one blew up in 1952 or something in Brazil. It had been in the atmosphere forever, and then came down in Brazil. And so he suggested that's what blew up in Roswell, was one of these balloons that had been kind of caught up in the atmosphere for a while.
Sure.
And all the strange markings, the kids decorated them.
Sure.
It wasn't an alien language. It was kid decorations from Japan.
Sure.
And it's one of those things that they didn't really talk about because they didn't want to scare people into thinking, well, Japan's basically bombing us at random here,
Right.
Yeah.
But, that's also a valid possibility. It doesn't explain the bodies, but the bodies seem to come up later, When Andrew Collins wrote Light Quest, he did a whole segment on Roswell, and in the end, he completely dismissed it because he said, once he really started looking into it, he found very little to support the idea that this was any kind of alien spacecraft or anything else, especially some of the interviews that the one rancher did initially, where he didn't think it was anything. None of this stood out to anyone as being extraordinarily unusual. He's just hey, there's a bunch of wreckage on my ranch. And I think it took him a few days before he even bothered to report it. And Andrew said that he kind of wished he left that part out of his book because so many people dismissed the book because he was dismissing Roswell. And I'm thinking, but you shouldn't do that. That's the whole point. If you're looking to see what the truth of this stuff is, you got to look at all these angles.
Yeah, and there's so many people that came after the fact to say, hey, I saw bodies sent to Wright-Patterson. I saw bodies en route to Wright-Patterson. And I really have to wonder how much of that ties into something Walter Bosley says about inking the waters. Seeing where somebody's going to leak, somebody's going to talk.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. Yeah. I think there's so much, in the nature of, I think Bosley talks about this a lot, the nature of disinformation within, military and government intelligence is so, it really is quite complicated and quite sophisticated. And the idea, it's never a cut and dried, the truth versus, the truth versus lies. For the most part, some of the ways in which things are being managed is by, putting the truth out there and mixing it, as we've I think, we've all said so multiple times, that is the way to see disinformation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in particular, looking to try to find those leaks. That's a really good point, David, I think.
There was before I even started doing the show, I found a John Keel. He was on a panel at Fort Fest, I think it was. And at the time, somebody was releasing a book on Roswell that was based on hypnotizing someone who was 2 years old when it happened. So someone who was there, in that, one of the people who was like a sibling, a child of someone who was involved, and they were 2 at the time. So whoever was writing the book hypnotized this person now to remember back when they were 2 and get all this new information. And Keel dismissed it in such a beautiful way, and he's just like, "Yeah, I'm not even gonna address this like it's a serious question." And it
sounds familiar. I could swear I've heard that before.
I mean, who knows if the book ever came out or not? But I mean, the idea. I mean, especially now with what we know about hypnosis, hypnosis isn't a memory recovery tool. And what are you going to recover from a 2-year-old that's going to be of any value?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, that was interesting. I'm sure that video with Keel is still up somewhere. I sought out a bunch of his talks and stuff at one point, and was surprised at how much stuff with him was up online. All right, so this one's from Russia Today, which can sometimes be a questionable source. So we'll take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, just as much as the New York Times.
Well, yeah, as much as any of them nowadays. What was that?
I said they're both cutouts, just for different governments.
And this says a second Earth somewhere in space. Russian scientists have photos of microorganism fossils likely to be from another planet. A group of Russian scientists have taken detailed photos of fossilized microorganisms, including seaweed, which could only have originated from another planet and were inside a meteorite that might be older than the Earth itself. The researchers created high-resolution photos of the fossilized bacteria preserved inside the Orgeal meteorite, I think, found in France in 1864. The largest of the rare Ci Klondike group, the celestial body has long captivated the interest of scientists due to the high concentrations of mercury and isotopically anomalous xenon that are not typical for meteorites of this type. Yet now, the scientists from the Paleontology Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research, one of the world's leading research centers in the field of nuclear physics, say they have obtained indisputable evidence of life existing on another planet, one that could be older than Earth. The images we've made are clearly interpreted. One cannot argue with them now, Alex Rozanov, the chief research officer at the JINR Astrobiology Center, told the agency RIA Novosti. I'm glad I picked one with lots of words I'm not familiar with. All right. The scientists plan to release an album containing all the photos in November. However, they've already shared some of the images with RIA. Rozanov admitted that his group was not the first to find traces of life in the Orgeal meteorite. All the previously discovered evidence, though, had been misinterpreted as scientists simply refused to believe it was true, which is not hard to imagine. The Orgeal meteorite repeatedly found itself at the center of speculation about traces of extraterrestrial life being reported found in it. At some point in 1965, a seed capsule was found in one of the fragments. However, the entire matter was quickly revealed to be a hoax. Later, the renowned NASA astrobiologist Richard Hoover claimed that he found fossils in the meteorite, but NASA distanced itself from his claims at that time, citing a lack of peer reviews. Now, according to the RIA, Hoover has joined the Russian team to prove that the celestial object does in fact contain fossilized bacteria remains. The fossils were studied in detail with the help of a high-resolution electronic microscope, which allowed researchers to discover several species of bacteria preserved within the rock. The microorganic fossils were found inside of the meteorite and not on its surface, the scientists note, adding that they could not have gotten there after it had already fallen to Earth. Some of the most striking discoveries include fossils of so-called magnetic bacteria. They rely on a planetary magnetic field to orient themselves in the environment and are usually found in aquatic environments such as marshes, seas, or lakes. Most recently, the group also found traces of a one-celled seaweed in the Orgeal meteorite as well, together with microorganisms resembling some species of amoeba. These discoveries show that such microorganisms could only originate on another planet that has a magnetic field and is at least partly covered with liquid water, a junior fellow at the JINR Radiobiology Laboratory explained. It is not known how old the Orgeal meteorite is, but the scientists believe it may well be older than Earth and probably even older than the solar system itself. The news comes just a day after an international team of researchers announced the discovery of phosphine gas in the clouds above Venus. Phosphine is considered a key biosignature since it's known to be produced only by certain bacteria and could not be the result of some chemical or physical processes that do not involve life forms. The scientists concluded that there is a possibility that there might be something living in the clouds of Venus.
Now, where did they say it was found at the very beginning of that article? You said it was France.
France in 1864. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of maybes in this. Like the article's presenting it as absolute fact, but I could totally see scientists dismissing this stuff, saying, okay, this meteorite's such and such an age. Oh, we found fossils? Those must not be fossils.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't fit their paradigm. But at the same time, I can also see RT, kind of exaggerating the validity of some of this evidence too. So it's interesting. But, how significant it is, it remains to be seen.
Yeah, and I'd be interested if there's any chance of any of those species that they have having counterparts on Earth, or are they saying they're completely foreign to Earth?
They're suggesting they're completely foreign to Earth because they think the meteorite is older than Earth. So it couldn't have formed on Earth. It came from somewhere out in space. Which
I'm dubious.
Yeah.
I mean, but it also kind of fits the panspermia idea. I mean,
yeah.
And we have when I was listening to the Brothers of the Serpents podcast, they were talking about how there's an enormous amount of bacteria and viruses that come from space to the point where they've actually wiped them off the International Space Station.
Yeah.
And they said that the most likely explanation for this is that they're coming in from space, but some people will say, no, they're just rising up from the surface of the planet. In which case, we're seeding space. So either way, obviously this stuff goes in and out.
Yeah, I would think so, especially since tardigrades can handle such extremes.
Right, exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, we could be looking at a very, very old piece of rock that came from, halfway across the galaxy. I mean, we know there are Earth-like planets out there, so it's not impossible to think life wouldn't have formed there, too. Maybe even seeded from the same place we were.
And I guess at this point, it being bacterial or life, that type of life, it just isn't exciting anymore. I mean, it's great, but I feel like there have been so many instances of I think we found microbial life here in the oceans of Titan or something like that. That at this point, it even within the realms of science, even popular science, I think it's kind of a given. So it could be in that case maybe it is bunk, David, and they'd be using it for propaganda purposes. But
who knows? I'm almost wondering if it's like a chunk of the edge of a volcanic area and it gets kicked up from us back down to us, and it's just something they don't recognize. But I don't know.
I see what you're saying there. Yeah.
And possibly they dated it wrong, because we know that happens too.
Oh yeah. I mean, when it comes to dating things, it's so hard to trust things.
Yeah.
So hard.
Because, I mean, carbon-14 dating is only reliable to a certain point and under certain conditions. I mean, all this stuff is based on sort of guesswork.
Yep.
And it gives us a picture to work with, but it's constantly being reevaluated and changed. And it's like, oh, wait, maybe that's not right, you know? It seems like the dendrology, the tree ring stuff is kind of interesting, because it can be, you know, similar around the world, but still, that's only within a certain time frame.
Yeah, and then I have trouble trusting ice core things, because something Douglas pointed out to me once was how we had a base during World War II, and we left some planes there, and then they ended up getting buried under like 60 feet of snow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that didn't take 6,000 years. That took 60.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the because you have that model of of everything, that everything happens in small increments, that there's no catastrophic changes, there's no sudden changes, and it's something that our current science applies to everything. You know, there's no suddenness, there's no catastrophes except on very, very rare occasions, rather than accepting that maybe these things are what actually move stuff forwards.
Yeah, and I'm admittedly very biased towards catastrophism. So,
well, I think there's a lot of evidence for catastrophism.
Yeah.
And the thing about Venus is interesting too. I mean, because maybe we're seeing life forming on Venus. The fact that they're even considering that, hey, maybe there's life in the clouds. You know, even if it's again microorganisms, that's still very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, considering how hot it's supposed to be down there.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
We have stuff living on the edge of volcanoes here. I mean, there could be life on the surface of the sun for all we know.
We are learning more and more about extremophiles, yeah. And then there's always the very interesting idea of plasma organisms, but that's even further out there.
And that ties into what we were talking about earlier with Andrew Collins' light. What the hell is the name of the book? Light Seeker or Light? I can't remember now. But he postulates that the intelligence behind UFOs is actually a plasma intelligence.
Right, living plasma. Yeah.
It's reasonable. I mean, his even though he can't prove the theory. The theory is a sound theory. Like it does incorporate everything we know about the UFO phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, this is valid. He's not cutting out the parts that don't fit.
Yeah.
He can actually explain it all with this. It doesn't mean that's what's happening, but it does leave it as a valid possibility.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's what Kenneth Arnold started to think towards the end of his life, too.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah. Light Seeker, I think it's called, is the book. I don't know. I had him on very early on to talk about it. And I think we talked more about Göbekli Tepe than the book, because I wanted to get them both in there in an hour show.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that was when all the Göbekli Tepe stuff was fairly new. All right. Do you want to do one, Chris?
Sure. Let's do this one, because it kind of. Oh, I should do this one. I'm going to do this one. This is from NPR, and this says paradox-free time travel is theoretically possible, researchers say. So let's see. They have a little bit of a thing they start out with. They make a Back to the Future joke, which I don't even need to read. Okay, according to a new paper from researchers at the University of Queensland, even if time travel were possible, the paradox couldn't actually exist. Researchers ran the numbers and determined that even if you made a change in the past, the timeline would essentially self-correct, ensuring that whatever happened to you send you back in time would still happen. Say you traveled in time in an attempt to stop COVID-19's patient zero from being exposed to the virus. University of Queensland scientist Fabio Costa told the university's news service. However, if you stop that individual from becoming infected, that would eliminate the motivation for you to go back and stop the pandemic in the first place, says Costa, who co-authored the paper with honors undergraduate student Germaine Tobar. This is a paradox, an inconsistency that often leads people to think that time travel cannot occur in our universe. A variation is known as the grandfather paradox, in which a time traveler kills their own grandfather, in the process preventing the time traveler's birth. The logical paradox has given researchers a headache, in part because, according to Einstein's theory of general relativity, closed time-like curves are possible, theoretically allowing an observer to travel back in time and interact with their past self, potentially endangering their own existence. But these researchers say that such a paradox wouldn't necessarily exist because events would adjust themselves. Take the coronavirus patient zero example. You might try and stop patient zero from becoming infected, but in doing so, you would catch the virus and become patient zero, or someone else would, Tobar told the university's news service. In other words, a time traveler could make changes, but the original outcome would still find a way to happen. Maybe not the same way it happened in the first timeline, but close enough so that the time traveler would still exist and would still be motivated to go back in time. No matter what you did, the salient events would just recalibrate around you, Tobar said. The paper, entitled Reversible Dynamics with Closed Time-like Curves and Freedom of Choice, was published last week in the peer-reviewed journal Classical and Quantum Gravity. The findings seem consistent with another time travel study published this summer in the peer-reviewed journal Physical Review Letters. The study found that changes made in the past won't drastically alter the future. Best-selling science fiction author Blake Crouch, who has written extensively about time travel, said the new study seems to support what certain time travel tropes have posited all along. The universe is deterministic, and attempts to alter past event X are destined to be the forces which bring past event X into being, Crouch told NPR via email. So the future can't affect the past. Or maybe time is an illusion, but I guess it's cool that the math checks out. So what do you think, gents?
It's all demons.
Right?
I love how they I mean, you can prove on anything with math if you try hard enough.
I like how it says crunches the numbers. I don't even know. I mean,
I like
I'm sure we could go in and read the actual reviews, but yeah.
Like what numbers? Because we can't do this to test it out.
Yeah.
There's no experimental way to go back in time and make sure we can't grandfather paradox something.
Oh, I like how the article says, this proves it. They're like, what?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
And it's just that's a great example of just how poor like journalism has become, especially with things with anything, I guess. Really, I mean, so often you click on an article and it's like a paragraph, and it's like this isn't an article, like there's nothing here.
And these are both like peer reviewed. I mean, looking at them, I did open up just because I have my academic credentials to be able to open them up. And like most of these, papers, it has not proven by any stretch of the imagination. Right. There is nothing that is proven with it. These are simply like models where one sort of system test works for them. Or at least that's how it reads to me. But yeah, the sort of pop science interpretation of it doesn't do anybody any favors.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, time travel would be very interesting, but yeah, we have no idea what the consequences would be, if we'd be able to change things, if by traveling in time, did we already travel in time? Do we create multiverses? I mean, time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that, like, it's there are so many different interpretations of how reality is impacted by our interaction with it within time. And I think that, this one in particular reminded me of the the sort of 12 Monkeys La Jetée trope, which, I think people have been talking about for forever. And whenever I see one of these new sort of time travel is theoretically possible in blank blank such and such a way, I always feel like it's rehashing these same tropes that, maybe started in science fiction or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah. There's a movie I really love, and I can never remember the name of Primer.
Primer, yeah, by Shane Carruth. It's a really good one.
Yeah, I love the way they deal with time travel, because the idea what they're doing is they're starting a time machine that somehow time is moving sort of like in a circle within.
Yeah.
And so like they can go back, like, days later they can get in this machine and travel back in time to when they started the machine.
Yeah.
And like that seems like a more believable method of time travel than just, I don't know, hopping in a TARDIS.
Right. You mean like sort of creating something that exists out of time that then you can use as a door? Yeah. Or as some like essentially a worm. That's kind of what a wormhole is in many senses.
Yeah.
The idea of like creating something that exists outside of time. Which, when you think about it in terms of, dimensions and that whole analogy of, the sort of flatland analogy of going up one dimension, it is interesting to think about it that way. Like if you could somehow create some way to move from into the dimension of time that you could like curve around it somehow. Yeah, if you have access to that dimension.
And there's also the idea that time isn't really a thing. I mean, they mentioned in there time is an illusion.
Right.
And we are experiencing it linearly. Sometimes words are hard. And, that's just what our brain needs to make sense out of it, but it's all happening at once.
Yep.
And in paranormal stuff, obviously there's the theory I came up with that some of this stuff is reflecting backwards in time, which is a form of time travel when you think about it.
Absolutely.
Even if it's not us, it's something moving backwards in time. There's been a couple of studies I've seen where they said, we've detected particles moving backwards in time. Again, I think the Snake Brothers read one of them on their show. And they said the only way they could explain this particular particle is that there's another universe moving backwards in time, and we're seeing particles from that universe.
I think I heard that.
Yeah.
But so much of this stuff, like they say this stuff like it's factual, I mean, now granted that does bring to mind what Laird Scranton talks about with his sort of dual universe idea that he picks up from the Dogon and such. But like, science doesn't, they throw out ideas and then people are like, oh, look what science discovered. It's like, no, someone came up with an idea that's completely unprovable in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Wormholes are a nice idea, and we can prove wormholes mathematically, but that doesn't mean they really can exist.
That's kind of where I'm at, because it's like, this is just debating. They don't know that.
Yeah. And anytime you hear someone and not, I don't want to get into this conversation, but like when you hear someone talk about climate change and they say, well, the science is settled. It's like, okay, science doesn't settle. Science is always taking in new data. If you're saying the science is settled, this is now a political conversation, not a scientific one.
Yeah, by definition, I mean, it's science is now, it is now science with a capital S. It is no longer the scientific method.
Right, exactly. Because science constantly brings in new data, new discoveries, and then applies it to what we know. But people have their beliefs, and that's the thing. It's hard to get over. You have that bias. It's a human nature thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, time travel is an interesting concept. I mean, maybe we'll discover we can do it like with our consciousness. We just can't affect things. Like we can look back in time. We can see other things.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the direction that I lean in, is I feel like the more that we learn about ourselves and existence and the way that our bodies interact with things, if we are able to sort of separate our consciousness from our body, there's going to be a lot more that's possible. Like, I think that, you know, our bodies are probably, or the physicality of things, in many ways is sort of stuck where it is. But if you sort of understand consciousness from the transmission standpoint, in that, you know, our bodies are a receptacle, you know, that is that has something that is, you know, picking up. It's like, I mean, there are many analogies people have used, you know, it's like switching the channel on a station or something like that, or, you know, it's like a receiver. And this goes into, you know, Terence McKenna's thing too, about, you know, I'll show you a UFO. Here's, you know, 5 grams of psilocybin mushroom. Like, you'll see one in 2 hours. Like, you want to have an alien experience, you don't have to go out and stare at the sky every night. So I do think that there is, you know, and this is getting very much into consciousness study stuff. I mean, heck, I live in the same city as Johns Hopkins, who's doing all that consciousness study stuff, and I dig it. But I do think that is, you know, I do think that that's, the more we find out, the more we're going to see that it's, you know, the possibilities for, you know, perceiving things, and for like movement, interplanetary movement and things like that, you know, could very well be based upon non-physical travel. I guess is the way what I would describe it as.
Yeah, and in the opposite end, I'm kind of fascinated with how time slips work, where it's a residual energy that you're encountering, and, you know, the idea that the residual could be ghosts and such as well.
Oh, absolutely. Or what about the people who occasionally see a scene of something that happened, you know, hundreds of years ago? And I think Strieber talks about someone who saw a dinosaur. Maybe he did. I can't remember now. Was walking down a street in like New York City and turned around and there were dinosaurs in a jungle. And, you know, what's that? Is that a time slip? Is it a consciousness thing?
Yeah.
You know, assuming his story is true, or whoever told the story was telling the truth. I mean, how do you explain that? And did the dinosaurs have feathers?
Right. That is the question.
Because I think, you know, that's another thing. How much of this stuff is shaped by our expectation of it?
Absolutely.
But, I mean, if you can remote view a space, I would assume you could probably at some point remote view other times.
There's gotta be. I'm sure somebody that knows more about remote viewing has a more than I do, which is pretty much everybody. I'm sure that there is something about. There's got to be. They have to have done that at some point.
Yeah,
tried to remote view through time. They must have.
All right.
I think so.
So this one is kind of a big deal. Back in September, this comes from the Niels Bohr Institute, or is written by, and it was published in phys.org. Entanglement, quantum entanglement realized between distant large objects, and this has been something they've been working on forever, and didn't think it was going to be possible. Entanglement is the basis for quantum communication and quantum sensing. It can be understood as a quantum link between two objects, which makes them behave as a single quantum object. Researchers succeeded in making entanglement between a mechanism oscillator, a vibrating dielectric membrane, and a cloud of atoms, each acting as a tiny magnet, or what physicists call spin. These very different entities were possible to entangle by connecting them with photons, aka particles of light. Atoms can be useful in processing quantum information, and the membrane, or mechanical quantum systems in general, can be useful for storage of quantum information. Professor Eugene Palzik, who led the effort, states that with this new technique, we are on the route to pushing the boundaries of the possibilities of entanglement. The bigger the objects, the further apart they are, and the more disparate they are, the more interesting entanglement becomes from both fundamental and applied perspectives. With the new result, entanglement between very different objects has become possible. To understand entanglement, sticking to the example of spins entangled with a mechanical membrane, imagine the position of a vibrating membrane and the tilt and total spin of all the atoms, akin to a spinning top. If both objects move randomly, but if observed moving right or left at the same time, that is called a correlation. Such correlated motion is normally limited to the so-called zero-point motion, the residual, uncorrelated motion of all matter that occurs even at absolute zero temperature. This limits knowledge about any of the systems. Wow, this is that is a really thick paragraph right there. And basically what entanglement is that two, if I understand it properly, like if you have two electrons that are connected to the same, like the same nucleus spinning around the same proton or whatever, once they separate from that, they will still respond as if they're connected. So if one moves right, the other will move left. And the idea with quantum communication is if you can predict that, if you can maintain that into larger structures, you would have instantaneous communication no matter how far apart things were, because no matter how far apart you separate the electrons, they continue to change their spin or movement instantly, as if they're connected like underneath reality almost. And they don't know how that works. In their experiment, Eugene Polzik's team entangled the systems, which means that they moved in a correlated way with precision better than the zero-point motion. Quantum mechanics is like a double-edged sword. It gives us wonderful new technologies, but also limits the precision of measurements, which would seem easy from a classical point of view. Entangled systems can remain perfectly correlated even if they are at a distance from each other, a feature that has puzzled researchers from the very birth of quantum mechanics more than 100 years ago. PhD student Christopher Osfeldt explained further, imagine the different ways of realizing quantum states as a kind of zoo of different realities or situations with very different quantities and potentials. If, for example, we wish to build a device of some sort in order to exploit the different qualities that they all possess and in which they perform different functions and solve a different task, it will be necessary to invent a language they are all going to be able to speak. The quantum states need to be able to communicate for us to use the full potential of the device. That's what this entanglement between two elements in the zoo has shown us we are now capable of. A specific example of perspective is entangling different quantum objects is quantum sensing. Different objects possess sensitivity to different external forces. For example, mechanical oscillators are used as accelerometers and force sensors. I've never said the word accelerometers before. And force sensors, whereas atomic spins are used in magnometers, or something like that. When only one of the two different entangled objects is subject to external perturbation, entanglement allows it to be measured with a sensitivity not limited by the object's zero-point fluctuations. Wow, that was a mouthful. There's only 2 paragraphs left here. There is fairly immediate possibility for the application of the technique in sensing both for tiny oscillators and big ones. One of the biggest scientific pieces of news in recent years was the first detection of gravity waves made by the Laser Inframeter Gravitational Wave Observatory, or LIGO. LIGO senses and measures extremely faint waves caused by astronomical events in deep space, such as black hole mergers or neutron star mergers. The waves can be observed because they shake the mirrors of the interferometer. Even LIGO's sensitivity is limited by quantum mechanics because the mirrors of the laser interferometer, wow, that's a hard word to say, are also shaken up by the zero-point fluctuations. Those fluctuations lead to noise, preventing observation of the tiny motion of the mirrors caused by gravitational waves. It is in principle possible to generate entanglement of the LIGO mirrors with an atomic cloud and thus cancel zero-point noise of the mirrors in the same way it does for the membrane noise in the present experiment. The perfect correlation between the mirrors and the atomic spins due to the entanglement can be used in such sensors to virtually erase uncertainty. It simply requires taking information from one system and applying the knowledge to the other. In such a way, one could learn both about the position and momentum of LIGO's mirrors at the same time, entering a so-called quantum mechanics-free subspace and taking a step towards limitless position or precision of measurements and motion. A model experiment demonstrating this principle is on the way at Eugene Polzik's laboratory. Wow. Okay, that was an easy read. So basically what they're saying is because you cannot measure both the motion, what is it? There's two things you can't measure at the same time. And it's what the observation effect screws up. Position
Right.
and momentum. So you can't measure something's position and momentum because once you measure one, it screws up the other.
Yeah.
And they're saying if you had it entangled and we could look at the entangled version, we would then be able to see both things without observing the original thing.
Right.
Basically.
It's a little beyond me.
Yeah.
I think it's a little beyond. I think it's a little beyond all of us. That was a pretty dense article, but
I mean, the one thing that I don't I get, because I wouldn't try to explain, but the one thing about quantum entanglement that I can kind of wrap my head around is this idea that in some space, like quantum space, some much more subtle space, and again, what I'm drawing on is sort of my knowledge of theories about the subtle body or the diamond body or the astral body that exists sort of in mysticism and different religions, is that that world, the subtle world, the world that sort of exists, at an even more sort of fundamental, subtle level than the quantum, world, I guess. There is no such thing as like space and time don't exist.
right.
And I think that there are many people that have made these analogies to sort of, ancient, Vedic thought, cosmology, and quantum mechanics. But I do think that at least that I can wrap my head around, this idea that at some fundamental level, things are still connected because there is, part of them exists in this no time, no space realm of existence.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
And I think the Vedic the Vedic writings show that we understood this stuff probably even better than we do now at some point in our distant past.
Sure.
And I think that also Laird Scranton's work shows the same thing, that there was some
Yes.
point in our distant past where we understood this so much better than we do now. Because we don't really understand it now. Now we have a lot of theories and not everything adds up.
Yeah, I feel like the way you just explained it made more sense to me than the scientific way. Because I was familiar with, the different bodies,
Yeah.
elementally, alchemically, more than the scientific way.
Well, I mean, the thing about it is that maybe that is, and again, I'm a filmmaker and I should stay in my lane when it comes to expertise about things, but part of me wants to say, well, maybe those are better ways, better models of looking at it, and that the issue is that we've given up on some of these more esoteric or mystical models of looking at some of these things, and that if we were able to combine the scientific method and how it relates to physical material things, and then alchemical, esoteric, hermetic, magical notions of these things that can't be measured, that if we had these working synchronously side by side, that's when we become super space wizards, I guess.
Yeah, and there's been times where I've heard Wal Thornhill and Rupert Sheldrake, talking about the ways that we're all connected,
Yeah.
limitless.
Yeah.
So-
Absolutely.
Rupert Sheldrake, absolutely. I mean, that's thank you for bringing that up. No, that's a much more a much better sort of bridge, I think, for some people, is thinking about things from the way that Sheldrake thinks about. And it's very, I mean, I know he's an outsider, but I still think that his his ideas and some of his research too holds up, I think, very much.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I mean, it's, Sheldrake's work is very interesting. I don't think any of it's been thoroughly disproved. I mean, the late amazing Randy claimed to have disproved his, pet experiment, but he lied.
Yeah.
And it took a while before they found out, oh, yeah, he lied. He didn't even try to recreate it. He just said he did and that it didn't work.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, Sheldrake, as far as I'm concerned, is definitely has some very interesting ideas that I don't think have been completely debunked in any way. Again, it's hard to say what's real. I mean, we can only say, like, okay, well, we know this doesn't work for some reason. So all we're left are the possibilities of the things that do work.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said about Andrew Collins' plasma explanation for UFOs. I mean, it's a solid explanation. It works, but we can't prove it. But it also doesn't have any holes in it.
Right.
And when you look at things like simulation theory, too, I mean, you get a similar type of thing there, where you're seeing, simulation theory hypothetically can explain everything, but we can't prove it yet.
Yeah, that's the whole critique of theoretical physics. And, I enjoyed reading, Michio Kaku books and stuff like that. But, and I think that there's, I think that there's validity to it in the same way that I think that there's validity to, existential philosophy.
Yeah.
But from sort of the hard science perspective, that's the thing about theoretical physics. And I think sometimes when people think, about theoretical physics and sort of these math proofs as being the same as like a tested proof in the laboratory that shows you that, yes, indeed, penicillin is going to get rid of polio.
Right.
It's a different thing.
Yes. Yeah. Math is an abstract.
Yeah.
We probably have time for a short one. Do you have one more, Chris?
Let's see. Do I have one more? Oh, yeah. We can do this one because it's kind of on the same track as some of the things we've been talking about. So this is in Psychology Today, and this is from October 27th, 2020. And it says, the title is Transplantation of Schizophrenia via Gut Microbiome. The gut microbiome contributes to psychiatric symptoms via changes in serotonin. Genetic and environmental factors contribute to schizophrenia. Science has not yet determined how these two factors interact to produce the diverse array of behavioral and neurochemical changes in the brain of these patients. During the past few years, scientists have focused on the role of the gut microbiome as an underlying cause in some aspects of schizophrenia. This concept is no longer considered science fiction. The bugs in your gut are known to communicate indirectly with your brain via the release of a large variety of chemicals. Your brain function, as well as your general health, is profoundly dependent upon these chemicals. Many studies have shown that a shift in the mixture of these bugs or the chemicals they release can make you vulnerable to certain mental and physical disorders. What's the connection to schizophrenia? Let's imagine that you have inherited genes from your parents that predispose you to developing schizophrenia. A recent study suggests that these same genes influence the balance of bugs in your gut, and together they determine some of the symptoms of schizophrenia. I realize that this seems like a really big leap of logic. However, a few microbial bug species have already been shown to be associated with both schizophrenia and its genetically related condition, bipolar disorder. Your intestinal microbiome, or gut bugs, modulate many critical body systems, such as the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axes, as well as the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone and corticosterone. These systems function abnormally in schizophrenic patients. Your gut microbiome also indirectly modulates the metabolism of serotonin in the brain via their control of tryptophan in your blood. Previous studies have shown that the microbiomes in the feces of patients with schizophrenia actively disturb tryptophan metabolism in both the peripheral and central nervous systems. Some of these tryptophan metabolites are now thought to contribute to the learning and cognitive deficiencies associated with schizophrenia. A recent study investigated whether the microbiomes in your gut play a role in the symptoms of schizophrenia. What they did may sound a little crazy. These scientists transplanted the fecal matter from humans diagnosed with schizophrenia to mice. Oh, I didn't get to this part. Mad science. The human fecal microbes quickly made themselves at home in the mouse intestines and survived for at least 2 weeks and then disappeared gradually. Take note, it is not easy to change your microbiome. Whatever you've read about probiotic supplements that claim to correct your gut microbiome is total nonsense designed to sell you a useless and rather expensive placebo.
Yeah.
The mice in this study developed many schizophrenia-like behavioral abnormalities. The authors were able to correlate many of these behavioral changes to altered tryptophan metabolism. The fecal transplant did not reproduce all of the symptoms of schizophrenia, and alterations in the gut microbiome are not the sole cause of schizophrenia. However, this study provided further evidence for the functional role of the gut microbiota in the pathophysiology of schizophrenia. Similar studies may lead to effective and safer therapies for schizophrenia in the future.
And again, shows how holistic our bodies really are.
Yes, indeed.
And South Park did an episode on the whole biome thing that was pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see that one.
That was in the last couple of seasons. I don't remember exactly when.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I can't help but think, though, that part of this has still got to be diet related and how it affects individuals.
Probably
That,
some degree. Yeah.
I mean, if there's something that, just upsets your personal body more but doesn't affect someone else, it might push you over the edge. I think you have to address the way different people digest different things differently, and the same with how mice would do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that in the same way that you're going to get the sort of genetic, or that you're going to get the diversity, you are going to, what I'm saying is you're going to get, a great deal of diversity, I think, in the way that different people for environmental and genetic reasons are going to react to different things. So you can't be like a blanket. There cannot be a blanket sort of fix for your biome or anything like that. And definitely different things are going to affect people in different ways.
Yeah.
I did think that it was interesting too that it was affecting tryptophan, which, as we know, it can be used as a ethanogen too. I mean, there's the whole Tikal book, tryptamines I have known and loved, and that they are one of the ethanogens that can be used to sort of produce those religious type, or those type of visionary experiences. And I do wonder if there's some correlation there.
Yeah, I heard the tryptophan and I was thinking turkey.
Right. Well, you're right. I mean, it is. It comes, and again, I am not an expert on this, but it is in the same family, and I myself have never used tryptophans as an ethanogen, but there are quite a few people I have. I want to say even Eli Lilly was doing some experimentation with tryptophan or different types of. Maybe it's not tryptophan itself, or tryptamines. Maybe I'm saying that. I don't. Oh, I'm sure somebody smart can correct me.
Yeah. And then I had to wonder at one of their last comments about, probiotics are just a placebo. And I'm like,
yeah.
Sounds like you have an agenda there.
It definitely does sound like you have an agenda there. Yeah. And I'm sure that they do. I mean, it's psychology today.
Right.
So they don't want you to fix your mental health by taking a pill. Oh, wait, they do, but just a different one, the one that they sell you.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's plenty of people that take advantage of whatever the in concept is without any evidence that it actually does anything.
That's true. There could be a snake oil salesman for anything.
Yeah, and there is. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, and with the pharmaceutical companies, of course, they're going to want you to take their pill. They're, hey, look, THC does all this good stuff for you if you take it in these doses with this plant. And they go, well, how can we manufacture that
Yeah, right.
It's like, no, you can just use it. It's free, right? We don't want
It's
it
a
to be
plant,
free.
guys. Yeah, grow it.
Like, how can we manufacture it so we can copyright it and sell it?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
See, and I had the experience a decade ago with my ex-wife where she was on, I'm forgetting what the name of the medication was, but it would put her into these little short 2-minute grand mal seizures.
Oh.
And I did the research, and I said, oh, she's having some kind of serotonin flux in her brain. And when the next time we went back to the doctor, I said, hey, this is what I've been researching.
Yep.
This is what it looks like to me. And he swore up and down that does not happen. It's not possible. They've done all the tests. It doesn't do that to people. You know, and she kept having them for another month or two, went off the medication. They went away.
Right.
Yep.
So no matter how much they say it's been tested, there's always outliers.
Oh, absolutely. All right, we're about out of time. So, Chris, where can people find you and your films?
You can go to brightrectangle.com or look on your local streaming service, Amazon Prime or Vimeo or soon to be iTunes and or Apple and all those others.
And that's for The Hill in the Hole and Corpse.
The Hill in the Hole and Corpse, and some of our other back catalog might be in there too. If you look at least under Amazon Prime for Bright Rectangle Films, we have our own page.
Nice. And David, where can people find you and your work?
My books are under my name on Amazon, or James Alderdice is me on Amazon, and I'm probably most active on Twitter, David_J West, Facebook too.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
I want to take a moment here to give a shout out to all my patrons. All of you help make this show possible. I want to give a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more: Frank Earl, Nagatha Christie, Patricia W., Barbara Fisher, Will Powell, Big Boy Limina, Craig Parmenter, Walker, Joanna Rojas, Maddie, Dale Potter, David Moore, Vincent Treewell, The Great Change, Sam Sharon, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Becky Trainer, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Taylor, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, Matthew Sproul, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Super Inframan, Riker and Stark, Tim, J. Otto Bullitt, Kevin Shrek, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Ray Benedetto, Linz Jackson K., Ellison Cook, Alfred Tuttle, James Lattimore, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you so much for helping make this show possible. All right, I hope that was enjoyable. There's a Patreon extra of about an hour where we cover a couple more news stories and go off onto some other topics. See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.